The fight against malaria in many ways can be seen as a success story. Considerable efforts indeed have been made in trying to eradicate the disease, which has apparently paid off. Mortality rates have been slashed by almost half over the past decade, according to the WHO. The fight is not over, of course. More than 500,000 people around the world still die from malaria each day, most of them children and women in Africa. So today we'll focus our attention on what remains to be done to eradicate this disease and what kinds of innovations are needed to achieve this. 2015, as you may know, is the European Year for Development, so we will be eager to hear about initiatives which are being taken in that context, whether public or private. The private sector is taking an increasingly important part in the fight against malaria. So to share their views today with us on this issue, we have the pleasure of welcoming Mr. Neeraj Deva. He will take the floor first. He's a British MEP from the Conservatives group, doesn't need to be introduced anymore. He has to leave in about 15 minutes, so we'll give him the floor first. We'll then turn to Christian Dan Preda, a Romanian MEP from the EPP group. And then we have four speakers who will share with us their experience as policymakers. Véronique Lorenzo from DG DEFCO at the European Commission, Linus Sigwe-Mezier, head of Novartis Malaria Initiative, Elizabeth Juma from the Kenya Medical Research Institute, and then David Reddy, the CEO of Medicines Malaria Venture. But we'll get started right away with Neeraj Deva.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a very unusual privilege for me to welcome to this parliament the new Foreign Minister of Sri Lanka, who I have very gently hijacked into this meeting for a few minutes, and His Excellency the Sri Lankan Ambassador to the EU. When I was born in Sri Lanka in 1948, it was a country ridden with malaria. In fact, my father, who was a doctor, was posted to a place called Badulla and caught malaria, because my mother, remembered this much in her life, very careful to prevent her children from getting malaria. I'm very pleased to be able to say that malaria is totally eradicated in Sri Lanka now. We have dengue, but not malaria. So the sooner you guys start working on dengue, the better it is. With the advent of 2015, we find ourselves at something of a rare tipping point. As the Millennium Development Goals come to their natural conclusion, attention has understandably moved towards the next chapter in international development. A chapter which must realize that aid funds need to target and drive wealth creation and economic growth, that development policies need to be inspired by innovation and an enterprising spirit, that people in developing countries have a basic right to clean water and essential medicines. The fight against malaria, the sixth MDG, has long been heralded as arguably the most successful campaign of its kind. The widespread distribution of impregnated nets, effective treatments, and the development of rapid diagnosis tests have seen mortality figures drop impressively from 47% between 2000 and 2013. This is an extraordinary contribution to the fight, which has been a joint effort between world institutions and the private sector. And yet, despite a present expectation that malaria is both preventable and curable, 500,000 people still succumb to the disease each year. 584,000 people died in 2013 alone. It is an affliction made all the more poignant for its rampance in children under the age of 5 and some 7% of whom will suffer attendant and lasting neurological episodes. Of the 75 resurgencies of malaria since 1930, most have been attributed to a decline in funding, according to a study by Clinton Health Access Initiative. If we fail to eradicate the disease now, diluted budgets and complacency will see past gains lost to increasing cases of drug resistance. One of the other great diseases in the world that I was aware of because I was immunized to it as a child was polio. But polio is now almost completely eradicated. There's only one country in the world, which I shall not name, which has polio, and we are working very hard in that place to try and see that polio is a matter of history. While donor countries are looking to trim their balance sheets, global wealth is also on the rise. Even the poorest countries in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia are set to meet a higher income brackets, a circumstance assured to snatch away their eligibility for pricing concessions, critically in the case of essential medicines, and bite into international support. The emerging economies of Brazil, China, and India must be encouraged to throw their increasingly significant weight behind the upcoming SDGs if they are to succeed. I believe that the private sector has a key role to play in the future of development policy. It is the engine of growth in all market economies, creating 90% of jobs and income for poor people in partner countries. 51 of the largest 100 economies in the world are corporations. They're not countries. The top 500 multinationals, corporations, account for nearly 70% of worldwide trade. There is an incredible potential that can be seized by working with them, as well as an incredible responsibility that they share in reducing poverty. An increasing number of companies have realized that they can contribute to sustainable development by managing their operations in such a way as to enhance economic growth and increase competitiveness, while ensuring environmental protection and enhancing social standards. We must work with them to develop inclusive business models that incorporate the poor in their value chains, whether as employees, entrepreneurs, retailers, suppliers, or distributors. Due to the threat posed to their workers by the disease, oil and gas companies in particular have driven forward the anti-malaria campaign. Chevron, the Global Fund's largest single corporate donor, will provide $60 million over the course of 8 years, while ExxonMobil Malaria Initiative runs programs in Nigeria, Chad, Cameroon, Equatorial Guinea, and Angola. And do I have to mention the Gates Foundation and what they have done in terms of eradicating malaria and providing bed nets? They offer the development community an invaluable resource, proposing capital investment, training schemes, intellectual content, and the key procedural knowledge needed to operate given technologies and meet regulatory standards. Yet to date, we have failed to harness the extraordinary potential posed by the indigenous private sector. And in my country, in Sri Lanka, where I was born, we have had a 2,500-year-old indigenous medical private sector whose talents, knowledge, and abilities are yet unknown in the West. That is why I'm so delighted we are having this discussion here today, together with Novartis, which has already done tremendous work in the fight against malaria in the world. I just also want to say again a warm welcome to the Honorable Mangala Samaravikrama, who has been appointed the new foreign minister. Sri Lanka has gone through a very difficult period, as you know, through the war and then this recent period of peace, but not very much reconciliation. And that is a target that we are now working towards. So you must forgive me if I have to go with my friend, my foreign minister, to another event which is being hosted by the Friends of Sri Lanka in the European Parliament. But thank you for inviting me to make this speech and to open your session. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. In the context of the European Year of Development that has just started, I am glad to host this debate and reflect on the health component of development. Better health is essential for people's well-being. It also contributes to economic development, as healthy populations live longer and are more productive. I am the European Parliament's rapporteur on policy coherence for development, and I am mainly looking at how our internal policies affect developing countries. But I am sure I can find some insight also for my report here during the discussion we'll have today. On the other hand, because I'm a political scientist, I must confess that by virtue of my background, I was not that familiar with the issue of malaria in developing countries beyond the general information that any informed citizen would have. I discovered this issue here in the European Parliament as a member of the DEVE committee. I have to say also that because I'm from a new member state of the Union, Romania, I must say that the concern for development issues is only nascent in my country, and questions as malaria seem rather remote for the general public. I think that public events such as this one can help raise awareness of the issue of malaria and possible solutions. In preparing for this meeting, I found out a host of fascinating figures and facts about malaria and what we can do to prevent and treat the disease by resorting to this development tool that was not used to its full potential, namely private sector involvement. And my colleague Deva has already spoken about how our discussion today over lunch will feed into his report. I should also say that private sector's role in fostering development is a theme that is very important for my group, the European People's Party. And I will start from a few general points on our topic, setting, so to speak, the scene for the expert discussion that will follow. First of all, I will say that one of the most common diseases in tropical and subtropical areas, malaria, poses a real challenge in terms of global health, as you know, I'm sure very well. And I'm glad that the Millennium Development Goals, in particular goal number 6, they've quoted already this, in particular goal number 6, draw public attention on the disease and contributed to the reduction of the incidence of malaria. I want also to welcome the Malaria Initiative and its comprehensive approach to healthcare based on 4 pillars: treatment, access, R&D, and capacity building, linked, of course, to the Novartis Malaria Initiative. I believe that the Malaria Initiative is an inspiring case study of what the private sector can do in the field of development. And I want to say that, to remind that since 2001, the initiative has provided more than 700 million treatments for adults and children without profit to more than 60 malaria endemic countries. I was really impressed by these figures. I want also remind that since children are particularly vulnerable to malaria, in 2009 Novartis partnered with Medicines for Malaria Venture to develop a pediatric formulation of its anti-malarial drug Cartem. Novartis also worked in partnership with roll back malaria, the Ministry of Health of Tanzania, and Vodafone to launch SMS for Life, an initiative that uses mobile phone technology to track and monitor stock levels of malaria medicines, long-lasting insecticide-treated nets, and other health commodities in rural healthcare facilities in Tanzania and Kenya. By focusing on access to treatment, helping communities deliver better healthcare, and investing in R&D in the next generation of antimalarials, Novartis is showing a strong commitment to eradicate malaria. Finally, I want to remind that as resistance to antimalarial drugs is increasing, I look forward to hearing more on current R&D and new generation antimalarial treatments. Innovation supports development, but innovation requires a participative approach involving interested parties. I will be pleased to hear our speakers elaborate on this.
Good afternoon, everyone. So let me just try and give you a brief overview of what the European Commission does. And in a nutshell, what it does is work in the weeds. It doesn't do any of the flashy things. Well, it does, but the most important things it does behind treating disease and behind delivering medicines is really to try and strengthen the national health systems, because although they are hidden, they are the absolutely necessary vehicle for any of the drug delivery or treatment or service provision to function. So I'll give you a little overview of what we do in health financing in developing countries. A couple of words on the post-2015 and the MDG 6, and a few words on research and innovation, because really we have two prongs. One is our development program, but the second is the research and innovation. That's DG RTD, and my colleague Immaculada is here, and she'll be much better able to answer any questions. On the general development program, we have two concentric circles. Really, the first, our core program is to support national bilateral health development plans, and we work currently from 2014 to 2020 programming period. We work with 17 partner countries, and we also work through the thematic programs. Now, the thematic programs, what they do is complement this national bilateral approach with the support to the global health initiatives, and of course all of you know the Global Fund for AIDS, tuberculosis and malaria, as well as the Gavi Alliance. We allocate, to give you an idea of funding, we allocate 370 million over the next 3 years for the Global Fund, and our commissioner has just announced today at the Gavi replenishment in Berlin 175 million over the next 6-year period. So we estimate our overall efforts on vaccination to 330 million euros over the next 5 years. In terms of the MDG 6 of the post-2015, we've always been committed to combating the three diseases, amongst which malaria. And this is really part of the unfinished business and the transformative agenda post-2015. We have Council conclusions on the transformative agenda that emphasize the universal health coverage and social protection for all that are central for the achievement of sustainable development. And that's really key, it's the center of our policy. It's beyond single diseases, is really to strengthen all areas of the health system, including the availability of qualified health workers, provision of affordable medicines, and adequate financing of the sector. And an example of this is our cooperation with WHO in 15 African countries, where we try to strengthen the pharmaceutical system with a particular focus on prescribing, dispensing, and the use of medicines. Now, if I turn to research and innovation, the EU has a large program to combat, in the fight against infectious diseases, including malaria, through the EU Framework Research Program, Horizon 2020. And our main program, the CDP2, now in the second phase, the European Development Countries Clinical Trials Partnership, is devoting 700 million euros from Horizon 2020 program, including some 66 projects worth 122 million. I won't go into all the figures. If you have any specific questions, we can go over this. But it's large, and CDP has supported over almost 250 projects, including 34 trials on malaria. There are several early-stage malaria clinical trials, as well as and in promising vaccine candidates. So while progress has certainly been made in malaria control and the insecticide-treated nets, effective treatments, new tools and diagnostics, we still have a huge challenge eradicating malaria, even reversing the disease. Resistance to insecticides and medicines, the difficulties of fostering innovation and investment in infectious disease research, for example, voluntary licensing arrangements, as well as securing an enabling environment. And this is perhaps the most important area where we welcome the contribution of the private sector. Because there's a clear market failure, lack of incentive to produce suitable products. And we in DEVCO work together with RTD to explore models at the global level and under the auspices of the WHO on how to dissociate the cost of research and development from the price of medicines and secure access. And one way in which we've been able to do that is to fund a preparatory action from an initiative of the European Parliament called Improving Access to Medical Products in Developing Countries through Building Capacity for Local Production and Relating Technology Transfer. That's a bit of a mouthful, but the point is this is supposed to identify challenges and obstacles to local production of pharmaceuticals and technology transfer, fostering coherence between industrial and public health policies. And it's precisely there where we have our role in bridging that gap. And supporting local production is one means by which governments in the developing world can seek to balance the availability of quality-assured medical products and meeting public health needs and priorities with products that are available, acceptable, and affordable. I'll stop there because I think I'm far over my 5 minutes.
Good afternoon. Let me start by acknowledging the Honourable Member of Parliament, Christian Dan Prada, and all of you for taking the time to come this afternoon. It's really an honor for me to be here to talk about the malaria initiative at Novartis. And Mr. Prada did a great job actually capturing the essence of what we do with the malaria initiative. So it's going to make my presentation much easier, and I'll go pretty quickly because I've got a very short amount of time. But suffice it to say also that for me, malaria is very personal because I was born in a West African country, in Nigeria, and was a victim of malaria for several years before I left for the United States. So this is a disease that I know very personally. But let me start with, can I move to the next slide? Just to give you an idea of background, where we are today. These are data from WHO 2014. Very impressive numbers, 54% reduction in mortality rates. Even more impressive is 4.3 million deaths that are averted. So a lot is going on in the positive direction. But if you look in the bottom, the disease continues to be a major problem. Next slide. So the Malaria Initiative, Novartis basically has put a stake in the ground in malaria over 20 years ago that this is a disease we are going to be part of solving. And that commitment has not wavered at all. It's as solid as it was at the beginning. We will be a leader in this area, and the way we're going to do it is to provide treatment. We're going to ensure access to that treatment, and the WHO Memorandum of Understanding we signed to provide Coartem at no profit is an example of driving access. But we also know that even if you get a drug to a capital city, it could sit there. You need to build capacity, you need to ensure that the supply chain is working properly in order to get the drug to the patient. And of course, research and development is a must because malaria has been able to beat every drug that was thrown its way. But even more important is the role of innovation and partnerships. I can't emphasize this enough, and I'll talk about it some more. Next slide. These are just to give you some ideas of numbers. Last year alone, we delivered over 72 million doses of malaria drug Coartem to malaria endemic countries. As the Honorable Member of Parliament said, on a cumulative basis, over 700 million doses of Coartem. If you count the actual tablets, it's about 10 billion tablets of this drug. So it's been a major commitment from the company at no profit. And we deliver this to many, many countries. Next slide. But we just don't stop there. It's continuous innovation. The WHO and UNICEF called for child-friendly formulations. We responded. And a few years after, we produced the Coartem pediatric formulation. And as we stand here today, over 250 million doses of this has been delivered. So really contributing to helping reduce this mortality in children. Next slide. But also for the adults. We got feedback that there are too many pills and people are not completing their treatment. So again, we reacted to this, and now we have a new formulation that reduces the number of pills from 24 to 6. And most of the adults are much happier to take fewer tablets than before. Next slide. Again, we look for not only just product innovation, but innovation that helps to drive access. And the Power of One campaign is one example where we teamed up with an NGO to try and raise money to purchase treatments for children. And we matched this up one-to-one up to a million treatments. I'm happy to announce that we're very pleased with the results so far. 3 million treatments have been delivered to or achieved for Zambia, essentially closing the malaria treatment gap for children formulation in Zambia. So quite an impressive result from this campaign. Next slide. We also look at system strengthening. One of the things that we found out was that stockouts was a major problem. And if you can imagine a mother that takes a child to a clinic in the middle of the night and there's no drug, the chances that that child may not make it to the next day is pretty high. So our former CIO, Chief Information Officer, decided to take this as a project. And it was, again, an example of a partnership with Malaria Medicine Ventures, my friend here, Dr. Reddy, with Google Maps, with IBM, and came together and produced a technology that allows you, with just a simple mobile phone, to track your stock levels and to report that to a database so that a manager can then look at that and adjust their supplies depending on what is happening. We are now extending the capability of SMS for Life to include surveillance so that they can report back on when there's an eruption of malaria infection in a particular area. But it also allows you really to push training to those healthcare workers. So instead of asking them to leave their post to come together somewhere, you could actually, through this tablet application, send them video training that you want to send to them. So we're very excited about this. Next. We also do a lot of other capacity building activities. We convene best practice workshops. We provide training to, for example, pharmacists. We provide materials for children to understand why they should sleep on their nets and what a mosquito bite could do to them. Next slide. But it is clear today that despite all the progress, to eliminate malaria, we're going to need new tools, all right? And one reason for that, and there are several reasons actually that are enumerated here. Number one is that you do need new drugs for fighting resistance in case that shows up. Number two is you need drugs that can actually kill all the parasites. We call that complete kill, because many drugs today do not kill what we call gametocytes, which are then passed into the mosquito and from the mosquito to the next person. You need single-dose treatments. These are drugs that you can then use to treat somebody who is not showing signs of infection, so we'll call them asymptomatic patients. So there's a number of unmet needs that we need to provide drugs for in order to really ensure elimination. Next slide. I'm almost in my last. The good news is Novartis recognized this need several years ago, and we've been working at it. And I'm happy to announce that we have 2 drugs in clinical development now in phase 2 addressing these needs. These drugs are KAE609 and KF156. And if you look at each of these needs, these drugs fill most of them. So we're very gratified at the progress being done. My last slide, next slide, please. And again, the power of partnership. How are we able to be successful, given that this is a no-return kind of activity for a profit-oriented company like Novartis? Is through partnerships. And the complex picture you see on the right just shows you the extensive amount of partnerships that's allowed us to produce these 2 new compounds in clinical development in a very short time period, in less than 6 years. Okay, so the key is really partnerships and pulling resources together in order to move things rather quickly through the pipeline. So I'm going to stop here and then I'll elaborate more during the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Honorable Member of Parliament, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me to be here today. And my talk is not going to be, it's going to make a case for investing in development, why we still need to invest in malaria. Of course, you've heard this before, that malaria is still a problem in some of the poorest countries, and they remain malaria endemic. And poverty and malaria is really a vicious cycle. And it is a socio-economic problem. And some of the social problems come in families, in households, and individual development. Children and women, particularly in rural areas, are usually at risk of illness and death. They always benefit the least from programs, getting access to medicines, to preventive technologies. And when resources are scarce, of course, then they are deprioritized. And typical households, even when the income is very little, will have to spend about $5 to $7 per illness of malaria. And a lot of research has shown that up to 50% of household expenditure on illness is actually spent on malaria in these endemic countries. And of course, this worsens household poverty of already vulnerable population. It takes people away from their minimal income generating activities because they have to spend time seeking treatment. And the risk of death is high because then you cannot access the treatment either because you don't have the money or the treatments are not there. And when death happens, then the cost even goes higher. And of course, malaria affects education. This is often not very clear, but it does, and it negatively impacts education. We need education to empower people to be able to prevent malaria and access the treatment. But then, the effects of malaria on education begin even before you're born. The disadvantage starts while you're in your mother's womb, by restricting your growth and limiting, your brain development, your neurological development. And once you're born, in early childhood, this is when you're most vulnerable to illness. And a lot of children get effects on their brain, even if they do recover from their illness. And this affects their capacity to learn. And when they make it to the school-going age, which is 5 to 15 years, a lot of the illness also occurs during this period. While most people have developed immunity to the severe form of the disease, the mild form of the disease still keeps you infected. You lose your red blood cells, you're anemic, you cannot concentrate in class, you're always fatigued, or you miss school. And there are kids who miss up to 30% of the school year just from illness, and this really affects their education. And of course, all this comes back to affect economic development. The studies have been done, and these have been shown, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, that we lose, this was in 2002, so up to now it's probably higher, up to $12 billion annually just from malaria. And it can reduce the GDP by up to 5 to 6% per year. And in 2011, a survey of medium-sized to large companies, not the very big ones like the oil companies, reported that malaria does negatively affect their business. Workers not coming to work, there is no productivity, they're not coming because they're sick or because their families are unwell. And 40% of these companies reported that that effect was serious. It seriously affected their bottom lines. And the effect of malaria on development is not just industry, as we have seen, but it's also in agriculture. And a lot of our sub-Saharan economies are agriculture dependent. You have loss of productivity, whether it's at peasant farming or level or at large-scale farming, because if you cannot work on your farm, then you cannot produce and you cannot feed your family. And it really results in reduced revenue, food insecurity, something that we are always trying to resolve year in, year out. It affects tourism, which in my country is the second most important economic activity. And if people cannot come because malaria is a problem, then you lose that economic. And of course, the social security, which we have seen, which is increased household poverty, social insecurity that is perpetuated year in, year out. And of course, we've heard about the drug side. Medicines have improved. A lot has been done. And having effective medicines like Coartem have improved the livelihoods and saved lives of children, as you have heard. But it hasn't happened from medicines alone. It has also happened from the use of insecticide-treated nets. And combined have resulted in a significant reduction in child mortality. But as has been mentioned, drug resistance and insecticide resistance both remain a threat to malaria. And so what can we do? Just like the drugs, we need to develop insecticides. There are candidates, just like the drugs that are there that have been in development. And 2 new classes are ready for further development to be deployed by 2022. But there remains a small gap, $50 to $100 million, to make sure this becomes a reality. And I think combined, we need a combination of interventions to be able to fight malaria. There is no one solution, and the impact on development is really, really stark. And we therefore need to work together, support what industry is doing in terms of developing innovative medicines, innovative insecticides to be able to tackle the problem of malaria. And this will make our vision a reality. Thank you very much.
So, honourable guests, ministers, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. I thought I'd start on the first slide showing you really the face of malaria, because we tend to show a lot of the figures. They're very large numbers, but behind every one is a face like this. So I represent the Medicines for Malaria Venture. We're a public-private partnership, an NGO, that works to bring together partners to develop the next generation of anti-malarials and to facilitate access. So if I can go on to the next slide. You've heard a lot about the enormous toll of malaria. I'd like to focus just on two areas and give you a few more details. So it's estimated that annually there are about 630,000 deaths from malaria. What is particularly alarming is almost 80% of those are in children less than 5 years of age. It also has a disproportionately large toll on pregnant women, with roughly 125 million pregnancies a year at risk. 15% of all anemia, severe anemia, that occurs in pregnant women is a result of malaria. And it causes around 10,000 deaths in pregnant women a year. And it's estimated that something between 75,000 and 200,000 infants die every year as a result. The other thing that is particularly concerning is the emergence of resistance, both to the insecticides that we need for the treated nets and for indoor residual spraying, but also to what is our state-of-the-art drugs today. And so we're seeing the emergence of resistance, particularly in Southeast Asia at the moment. MMV operates according to the following model. So we basically take syndicated investment from government, philanthropic sources like the Wellcome Trust and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We work in partnership with those funders, with the pharmaceutical industry, academia, and other partners to establish a virtual drug pipeline that we then manage. We have expert review by independent groups of that pipeline to make sure that we only bring forward the best drugs that are going to meet the most pressing needs that are out there. And we do this within a strong contractual framework to ensure that at the end of the day, our partners are committed to launching the drugs in the malaria endemic countries and to affordable pricing and access. Next slide. Just a flavour for some of our partnerships. We're now in partnership with 28 pharmaceutical companies, 13 biotechs, but also 56 universities. And half of the malaria drug pipeline today is actually coming out of academia. And I think this is very promising because all sectors are contributing. Next slide. Now, to date, we, in collaboration with our partners, have been successful in launching 5 drugs. And we're very grateful for the support of Novartis for the launch of the first drug that MMV was involved with, Coartem dispersible, and also the collaboration around some of the next generation drugs. You also see some other drugs there. I'd like to point out injected artesunate for the treatment of severe malaria, and also SP amidiaquine, which is being used for prevention, particularly in areas of well-defined malaria seasonality. Next slide. So just some of the highlights on 2 of these products. So in concert with Novartis, Coartem dispersible was the first child-friendly formulation of the state-of-the-art artemisinin combination treatments. It was launched in 2009, and since that time, 250 million courses of the child-friendly formulation have been delivered. And this is on a not-for-profit basis by our partner Novartis. Next slide. In addition to that, we worked with a Chinese company called Guilin Pharmaceuticals, and there's a drug, injected artesunate, that can dramatically reduce mortality in people with severe malaria but it wasn't being produced at a quality standard. We were able to work with them. They went through GMP, brought their manufacturing up to a new level, were WHO pre-qualified, and now they're supplying this drug at an affordable price. We estimate that with the number of treatments that have been supplied, around 165,000 additional children's lives have been saved. Next slide. But as we mentioned, it's really important that there is a next generation of drugs coming through, because we've made enormous progress, but that can be halted in a heartbeat through resistance. And so the drugs here are aimed at addressing unmet needs, addressing resistance, ensuring that there are drugs available for children, for pregnant women, for severe malaria, and also for blocking the cycle of transmission. And there are 9 new medicines in clinical development. It's a costly endeavour, but because of the high risk associated with drug development, we need to ensure that we have a very broad stable. Next slide. So this isn't to be read, but this is the stable of drugs that we're currently collaborating on at all different phases of development with all different types of partners. And our hope is that from within these, we can assemble the next generation of combination treatments that will stay several steps ahead of resistance. Next slide. So just finally, I'd like to give a huge thanks to our donors. Without our partners and without our donors, MMV is nothing. We're a partnership. These donors make it all possible. I'd also like to thank EDCTP. While they don't fund us directly, they fund our partners and the network that we're a part of. And one closing remark that I think is incredibly encouraging. 2 of the drugs that were on that portfolio, their governments, the South African government and the Thai government, are now going dollar for dollar with us in the development of those drugs. And I think this is an incredibly encouraging sign. One of the drugs was invented through a collaboration in South Africa itself. So we think this is a huge achievement. Thank you very much.